come now to the next section of the life of Hezekiah, and as you can see from the title of this study, we're going to have a look at the implications of the historical record of Hezekiah as it sits in Isaiah, pointing to the latter days, to the latter day Assyrian and the king of the north. That's going to occupy us for the next 45-50 minutes or so. And I'm going to start with a Time magazine. This is the Time magazine of October 2015, which of course is a month after Russia had entered Syria. And the Time magazine came out and said Russia just wants to be friends. And of course we know that that event, the introduction of the Russian forces into Syria, changed the entire landscape in the Middle East. It's been going on now for around about 12 months. And the scripture makes it quite plain where this is leading. So we want to have a look. This is very relevant, isn't it? So you probably didn't think, most of you probably didn't think you're going to come along and hear a sort of like a lecture type address on the kings and prophets of Israel and Judah. Well, that's what you're going to get. All right? So we're going to actually look at the prophetic implications that we're actually watching now, and it's going to come from the record of Kings and Chronicles and that record of Isaiah. So this is where we are, sitting right at the end of Israel's history in the reign of Hezekiah. I want you to come with me, if you would, to the book of Isaiah. I want to do a little exercise at the start of this session. Now, some of you will have done this, but what we want to do is have a look at this title, The Assyrian. It is the title of Gog, the Gog of Ezekiel 38 verse 2 in the prophecy of Isaiah and Micah. Now it's well worth doing this exercise. You see the underlined passages there on the screen behind me? Isaiah chapter 10 and verse 5 is where we'll start. And I would suggest that if you have a highlighting pen of some kind and you want to do this exercise, then you could just highlight the phrase, the Assyrian. So Isaiah 10 verse 5 says, O Assyrian, the rod of mine anger and the staff in their hand is mine indignation. So who does this refer to? Well, of course, it's all based upon the Assyrian invasion of the land of Judah in the days of Hezekiah. But we're given the hint as to what it really refers to. This is not really just history, this is prophecy. So let's just read on into verse 6 of Isaiah 10. I will send him against an hypocritical nation, and against the people of my wrath will I give him a charge to take the spoil and to take the prey. Tell me what passage of the Bible you've got written in your margin. You've got written in your margin Ezekiel 38 and verse 12. Hast thou come to take a spoil? Hast thou come to take a prey? So there it is. The scripture is interpreting itself, isn't it? It's telling you that this is a prophecy of the latter days. So what we learn from that is that this title, the Assyrian, is what God uses to describe Gog of the latter days in this prophecy of Isaiah. He does the same in the prophecy of Micah. So let's just work through these verses. Again in chapter 10 and at verse 24 we read, Therefore thus saith the Lord Yahweh of hosts, O my people that dwellest in Zion, be not afraid of the Assyrian. He shall smite thee with a rod and shall lift up his staff, etc. Now, I'm not going to read verses 25 and 26 because in a moment we're going to be coming back to them. But you'll see that if you just cast your eyes on verses 25 and 26 of Isaiah 10, you will find that this is actually a reference. We might make a brief mention, just to add to this. Let's just have a little bit of a digression here, shall we? I will read verse 26. And Yahweh of hosts shall stir up a scourge for him according to the slaughter of Midian at the rock of Oreb. Now I'm going to stop there, that's all I need. Slaughter of Midian, work of Gideon, Judges chapter 7. You all know that story. Judges 7 is a type of Armageddon. There are two that are dealt with, two Midianites that are dealt with in Judges 7, their names, or there's actually 4 of them, but the two that are dealt with in chapter 7 are Oreb and Zeb. Oreb the raven, Zeb the wolf. And of course the Zeb side of it is the Catholic element in the latter days. So this is why Isaiah only deals with Oreb. Because Oreb, you see, is the reference to the Gogian. This is the Russian element, the Gogian element of Armageddon. It's the Zeb, or the Catholic element, is dealt with thereafter. That's why you see it says he destroyed them on a winepress, because it's about the treading out of the winepress of the wrath of God. So there's an accuracy here. So whenever you find reference to Midian in the scriptures, beyond Judges chapter 7, it's usually about Armageddon. Let me give you a couple of examples. You can turn back a page to Isaiah 9 and verse 5, or verse 4 and 5. Now you know what Isaiah 9 verse 6 and 7 is about. It's about the kingdom of Christ. Look at verses 4 and 5. For thou hast broken the yoke of his burden and the staff of his shoulder, the rod of his oppressor, as in the day of Midian. For every battle of the warrior is with confused noise and garments rolled in blood, but this shall be with burning and with fuel of fire. That's a reference to Armageddon. And what follows, of course, in verses 6 and 7 is the establishment of the kingdom. So, again, there's reference to Midian in the context of Armageddon. Another one, which you can look at in your own time if you wish, is Psalm 83. You might want to jot down alongside of verse 4 of Isaiah 9, Psalm 83, verses 9 to 12. Now, I'd love to have time to go there, but we don't, so we'll look at that later after the session. But these are the three passages, Isaiah 9, verse 4, Isaiah 10, verse 26, Psalm 83, verses 9 to 12, that tell you that when you look at Judges chapter 7 and the record of Gideon and his 300 men, chosen by the judgment seat process, all right, at the beginning of chapter 7, who go forth with him as one man. They're just one man, the body of Christ. They go forth and destroy the Midianites. It's a type of Armageddon. And what follows then, of course, in chapter 8 is the work of finishing off the Catholic system and the second exodus of Israel, which of course is intimately entwined with the judgments on the Catholic system. So it's all there. I mean, the whole thing is there in the book of Judges. In fact, I can give you the whole work of Christ, first and second advent, in great detail, just using the book of Judges. That is how extensive the typology is in that. It is astonishing what is there. Okay, so that's entirely another subject, but it's there. So that's why you have reference here to the Midianites in relation to Armageddon. But we're not talking about that, we're talking about the Assyrian, aren't we? So let's go on with this little exercise. Look at chapter 14 and verse 25 of Isaiah. 14:25. But I will break the Assyrian in my land. That's all I want. We did read verse 26 on a previous occasion. We'll be back there in a minute. Have a look at Isaiah 30 and verse 31. So we come along. I'm going to actually spend a little bit of time in a minute on this section of Isaiah 30 to 35, which are the chapters that are squeezed up against the historical chapters of Isaiah. But look at Isaiah 30 and verse 31. For through the voice of Yahweh shall the Assyrian be beaten down. Now, you need to look at this context to know it's latter days. And we'll see that in a minute. Have a look at chapter 31 of Isaiah and verse 8. Then shall the Assyrian fall with the sword. And context again is quite clear. And then I want you to jump to Micah, the book of Micah. Now we pointed out, of course, that Micah's prophecy is really sort of like a shadow. It's a reflection of the prophecy of Isaiah. There's not a great deal that Micah mentions that's not found in Isaiah. So we come to Micah chapter 5. And verse 5, and we read this. Now you know the context, and we'll reflect upon this in a minute again. Verse 5 says, And this man, namely Christ, shall be the peace when the Assyrian shall come into our land. And again in verse 6, you look down towards the end of that verse, it says, Thus shall he deliver us from the Assyrian when he cometh into our land. So we know, don't we, that this title, the Assyrian, is used by God in Isaiah and Micah of the latter day goat. Context tell you that. So it's very important to understand the way that this is used in those prophecies. It's obviously based on the invasion of Judah in the days of Hezekiah that we've been considering. Now the Assyrian army was destroyed outside the walls of Jerusalem, as will Gog's army. And faithless Ahaz, as we've seen in our studies, is the type of modern Israel who made the first pact with the Assyrians. And I want you to come to have a look at this pact that Ahaz makes with the Assyrians. I want you to come to 2 Kings chapter 16. So here in the 2 Kings chapter 16 and at verse 7, we have Ahaz's response to the machinations of Rezin, the king of Syria, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, the king of Israel in the north, who are combining in league against him to overthrow him. Verse 7. So Ahaz sent messengers to Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, saying, I am thy servant and thy son. Come up and save me out of the hand of the king of Syria, and out of the hand of the king of Israel, which rise up against me. And Ahaz took the silver and gold that was found in the house of Yahweh and in the treasures of the king's house, and sent it for a present to the king of Assyria. Now, the record of 2 Chronicles 28 tells us that he paid this money, and the king of Assyria did not help him. Well, yes and no. He didn't get the help that he was asking for, but he got help. And verse 9 describes that help. Verse 9 says this, And the king of Assyria hearkened unto him, for the king of Assyria went up against Damascus and took it, and carried the people of it captive to Kir, and slew Rezin. So there's one of his problems out of the way. Rezin, the king of Syria, is killed by Tiglath-Pileser, and in fact Damascus was ruined for decades. Now this, of course, was a great help to Ahaz in a way, because it took the interest away from him. The league has collapsed because Rezin is gone. So this was a very great help to him. Now, this is the history. The Syrians were subdued in around about 720 BC by the Assyrians under Tiglath-Pileser. Damascus was taken and destroyed, and historical accounts say that it lay in ruins for 40 years. And as we just read there, the inhabitants were carried away captive into Assyria. So in this, prophecy was fulfilled. And Isaiah 17 and verse 1 is one of those prophecies. Now, we've had people referring to Isaiah 17 in relation to what's happening in Syria today. Damascus is already half in ruins, of course. It'll be finished off in due time, because what happened in ancient history is going to be repeated again. So Isaiah 17 is a fulfilment of that prophecy, of a prophecy about the destruction of Damascus, but it has this latter-day implications. And there is unquestionably latter-day references in Isaiah chapter 17. Now, it's not my intention to give an exposition of this chapter, but to point this out. Look at verse 1 of Isaiah 17. The burden of Damascus. Behold, Damascus is taken away from being a city, and it shall be a ruinous heap. And so it was. For decades, for 40 years, say the historians, Damascus lay in ruins. And the kingdom of Syria remained a province of Assyria till the capture of Nineveh by the Medes in 625 BC, when it fell, of course, under the Persian conquerors. So this was the history of Damascus. Now, of course, this is not the only place where Damascus is spoken of in Bible prophecy. So Isaiah 17 verse 1 was primarily fulfilled in the events of 2 Kings 16 verse 9. But just as the prophecy of Isaiah has latter-day implications in relation to the invasion of the Assyrians, so this is going to have a second round. There's going to be a secondary fulfilment. Damascus is again going to be destroyed and to lie in ruins. It's already half done. So there's this passage that we've been referring to. There's Isaiah 17, prophesied that Damascus will be taken away from being a city, be a ruinous heap. And Amos 1 verse 4 adds to that. Amos 1 verse 4 says that Yahweh would send a fire into the house of Hazael, which should devour the palaces of Ben-Hadad. That's what happened when Tiglath-Pileser came down in around 720 BC. But another prophecy is Jeremiah 49, a prophecy against Damascus. I want you to come to Jeremiah 49 because this actually is a commentary on what happened when Tiglath-Pileser turned up to destroy Damascus. Jeremiah 49, verse 24 and 25. Damascus is waxed feeble, and turneth herself to flee, and fear has seized on her. Anguish and sorrows have taken her as a woman in travail. How is the city of praise not left? The city of my joy. Now that sounds as though, when you read that just as it appears in the King James, it appears as though that God takes some kind of joy in this city. Well, that's not what the Hebrew text says. Now here's another reference to the ISA, to the Interlinear Scriptural Analyzer. This is how that passage really should be rendered. How is it that the boasted city is not forsaken? The town of elation. Now this refers to the inhabitants of Damascus at the time who failed to take the opportunity to flee. There was certain fear, there was a desire to flee, as verse 24 says, but some of the strong young men of the city said, oh, we're not going to run away. We can handle this Assyrian. So they stayed. And look at verse 26. Therefore her young men shall fall in her streets, and all the men of war shall be cut off in that day, saith Yahweh of hosts. They didn't take the opportunity to flee, so they fell. They were destroyed by Tiglath-Pileser, along with their king. So that's what happened to Damascus. So Isaiah 17 is actually primarily fulfilled, but it has, as I said, its latter day secondary fulfillment to come. By the time of the Medo-Persian supremacy, Damascus had not only been rebuilt, but was the most famous city in Syria, according to the historian Strabo. Well, that's all I want to say initially about Damascus, because I want to now turn to the king of the north. ISIS. They played a big part, haven't they, in the world's experience in the last couple of years. ISIS, of course, is an acronym. It stands for the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. But there's also another title, another acronym, ISIL. It's the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. Then the Levant is the area that includes Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, Iraq, Cyprus, Palestine, a southern part of Turkey and Israel. It's pretty large. Brother Thomas often uses the term Levant in his writing. It's a much more common term in his day than it is today. Now ISIS emerged in 2011 in Iraq as an outgrowth of Al-Qaeda, the ones who were responsible for taking down the Twin Towers in New York. But Al-Qaeda now regards ISIS as being far too extreme for them, which of course is saying something, isn't it? They've recruited rebel fighters from Syria, from Western fighters from all over, from France, from Australia, from the US, Germany and the UK. And the acts of ISIS are well known. They captured large swathes of Syria and Iraq in 2014 and 15, indiscriminately beheaded and butchered all non-Muslims and other perceived enemies. Now, you remember our video last evening started at the Euphrates? Well, we just left a little town called Jarablus, right on the border. It's up near, the reason we went there is because it's near Karkemish. Now, you can't actually get to Karkemish from Syria. It's in Turkey. But we wanted to get as close to Karkemish as we could, and we did. We could look over and see it. Now, we went down to the Euphrates. We were escorted down there by two Syrian policemen who had befriended us. We think they're probably now beheaded. Because you see, when ISIS came in to Syria, one of the first towns that they took was Jarablus. And they rounded up the men of the city and beheaded them. Now we spent time playing with the children in the street of Jarablus. It's not a tourist town. And we had to go into some shabby accommodation that was rustled up by these policemen. But I think about that all the time, how, we had this wonderful time with these children. We had brethren drawing pictures of koalas and kangaroos, and the children were laughing. It's all gone. It's all gone. It's just terrible. So the ISIS has butchered and beheaded people. Even, you saw Tadmor or Palmyra in the movie. Well, when they took that over, not that long ago, they rounded up the people of that town, because you couldn't escape. They'd surrounded it. There's no escaping. And we went into cafes there, and we were being served by these joyful people, and we're having laughs, and so, most of them are gone. They're beheaded. I saw pictures of bodies in the street of Palmyra with no heads on them. Just, it's awful. So this crowd have made a huge impact upon the world, especially upon the Middle East. They're credited with, even outside the Middle East, 1,000 casualties outside of Iraq and Syria. January 2015, they attacked, of course, in France, again in October. They downed the Russian plane over the Sinai region. In November 2015, they coordinated attacks in Paris and killed off 130 people. So they've had an influence. But ISIS is only a catalyst. They're only a catalyst. They're not going to play a huge role in the future. They're a catalyst to bring Russia into this area, because that's what Bible prophecy requires, and we want to just step you through that. Now, some of you have heard this before, but it's probably worth going over the ground again. For those that haven't heard it, it's very important to see where these events are heading. You see that yellow on that map behind me? That's the area of ISIS control in 2015. Now, since that map was drawn, there's been a diminishing of the territory they control. So they don't control a lot. You see those little lines running here? They control the roads. And you control the roads, of course, you've got control. It's like the spider web between the towns. You control the towns, because you can't get into these towns if you control the roads. Now, they've reached out, of course. They're found in North America, they're in Europe and the Middle East, they're in Australia. We have idiots running around Australia trying to stab policemen to death. We had one guy who shot a policeman to death. So there's all sorts of things happening like that. But they signed their death warrant in September 2014. They personally threatened Vladimir Putin. Nobody does that. All right? You do not threaten Vladimir Putin. They personally threatened him because of his support for the leader of Syria. And so they made other statements. They said their state, when they established the Islamic State, would free the southern Muslim Russian states from Kremlin control. They said that they would liberate the Chechens. And ultimately they said they'd capture Moscow. What idiots. They have signed their death warrant because Putin is after them. In November 2015, he vowed to hunt down ISIS wherever they are to revenge the downing of the Russian tourist flight over the Sinai. And things like this appeared in the daily papers. In the Daily Express of the UK, end of ISIS. Putin sending 150,000 soldiers to Syria to wipe out evil Islamic State. Yeah, they're on his hit list. There's no doubt about that. He's going to get them one day. And of course he's already making an impression on them, isn't he? Bombing them. I mean, the living daylights out of them and everybody else. So, he's after them. And this is what's got to happen. I want you to have a look with me at Daniel 7 verse 7. You can see it on the screen behind me. But this is a very important passage in relation to this. Daniel 7 verse 7. Daniel says, after this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, which we know as the Roman Empire, dreadful and terrible, which it was in its history, strong exceedingly. It had great iron teeth, there's your identifier, the iron of Rome. It devoured and brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with the feet of it. And it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and had 10 horns. Now, we know, of course, the fourth beast of Daniel 7 lines up with the legs of iron, of the image of Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel 2. You notice that phrase in green on the screen? Now, while all the rest of that verse was fulfilled in history by the Roman Empire, that green section wasn't. That has never been fulfilled. Now listen to the commentary of Brother Maurice Stewart on this. Brother Maurice Stewart, in his study notes on the prophecy of Daniel, published in August 1973, wrote this about this passage. He said, "Let us emphasise, here is an important statement that has not as yet been fulfilled. Rome has never trampled the residue of Persia underfoot. It has never occupied all its territory. A power must yet arise which will occupy the territories of Babylon, Persia, Greece and Rome, to be afterwards subjected to a higher power, namely Jesus Christ. Russia will do this. Thus, like the image of Daniel chapter 2, whose metals will have to be confederated together before they can be broken to pieces together, so also this terrible fourth beast vision has a latter day application." He's quite right. So this is an unfulfilled prophecy. It's going to be fulfilled in the latter days. The residue has to be stamped with the feet. Now this is military action. You send soldiers, you put boots on the ground, as they say. Military action. It's already begun. There are Russian troops in Syria. It's already begun. Let's have a look at the maps of these four empires. There's Babylon, relatively small area. There's Medo-Persia. You see it goes right over to the east, to the Indus River, to India. Along came the Grecians, took over basically the same territory as the Persians. Then along came the Romans. Now you'll notice that they got as far as the head of the Persian Gulf, but they couldn't hold it against the Parthians. They were forced back, and so in 118 AD, Hadrian withdrew from Trajan's conquests in the east, and he drew a line. In fact, built Roman forts 1 Roman mile apart, right down through what we call modern Jordan and Syria today. And I know they're there because I've stood in a few. They're there. This became the line, the eastern border of the Roman Empire for the rest of its history until late 400s. All right? That is where their eastern border was. So Rome, in its history, never secured the territory to the east. That is the residue of the three empires that Rome never controlled. Now, each of these empires, when they took over from the other one, devoured their territory. Rome never devoured the territory to the east. So this is what they have to stamp with the feet thereof. This has to be taken by an invasion, by troops on the ground, stamping the residue with the feet thereof. And of course this lines up perfectly with Ezekiel 38 verse 5, which says that Persia is involved in the confederacy of Gog. Persia is not, of course, just Iran. It's that entire area from the Mediterranean right across to the area of what we would call Pakistan today. So in September 2015, Russian troops moved and aircraft into Syria. Iran, of course, is helping its fellow Shiite government in Iraq against Sunni ISIS influence. ISIS threatened Russia in September 2014. And of course ISIS just happens to have an unusual third name. It's called Daesh or Daesh. You've heard politicians talk about Daesh. Well, it's a derogative term. It's an adapted acronym of their Arabic name, the Dawlat al-Islamiyah, whatever they are. And of course, it's similar to another Arabic word, das, which means to trample down or to crush. Yeah, ISIS is the catalyst to bring Gog into this northern area of that region, so that they can become the king of the north. and they're going to trample down ISIS in the process, along with others. That's also supported by a third passage in Daniel chapter 11 and verse 40. Now, I think most of us are pretty familiar with Daniel 11:40. The first part of this verse was fulfilled in 1917. You know that the whole of Daniel 11 is about the king of the north and the king of the south. Now, the king of the north was Seleucus and his successors, one of the generals of Alexander, who when Alexander died within 20 years or so, they divided the kingdom up into four parts. The two major parts were the Seleucid kingdom, which went from Syria to Pakistan, and the Ptolemaic kingdom, which was based in Egypt. Ptolemy was the establisher of that. So these two powers, king of the north and king of the south, used the land of Israel as their stomping ground. So Israel was the meat and the sandwich as these two powers fought down through history for hundreds of years. And so they played a very important part in the unfolding of history that led to the birth of Christ. And they're going to play an important part in the latter days. Now, to be called the king of the north, you have to be like they were. What were they? A foreign occupying power. A dominant foreign occupying power. And the first part of Daniel 11 verse 40 was fulfilled by Britain when it was a foreign occupying power of Egypt between the early 1880s and the early 1950s, when Britain left Egypt. It was in 1917 that the British used Egypt as the base. They were controlling Egypt. They used Egypt as the base of operations against the Turks who were controlling Palestine. And they used their troops, including Australian troops, to push the Turks out of Palestine so that obviously it could be given to Britain that they ultimately would support a Jewish state. And of course it all comes to pass in 1948. So that part of the prophecy was fulfilled. At the time of the end, shall the king of the south, the foreign occupying power of Egypt, Britain, push at him. Now the him here of Daniel 11 is the king of verses 36 to 39 of this chapter. And that king is the power occupying Constantinople. So he pushes at the power occupying Constantinople, the Turks, pushes them out of the land. But the second part of that verse hasn't been fulfilled, because we don't as yet have a king of the north. We don't have a king of the north. To be called the king of the north, you have to be a foreign occupying power of the region from Syria to Pakistan. You can't be called the king of the north unless you've got it, scripturally. Well, it's coming. It's coming because, you see, Daniel 7 verse 7 says that there has to be a power that's going to trample the residue with the feet thereof. Okay? And as Brother Maurice Stewart correctly says, that power is Russia, and they will take control of that whole region, and they will then become the king of the north. Okay? Then, when they've got that, they can attack Turkey. They can take Constantinople. But not before. We've got to get this right. Okay, so this is what this prophecy is telling us. So the hymn of Daniel 11:40 is, as I said, the king of verses 36 to 39. And Brother Thomas said this in Opus Israel about the power occupying Constantinople. He said this: "It matters not whether they be pagan Romans, Catholic Greeks, Muslim Turks, or Greek Catholic Russians, the power that rules in Constantinople and plants its standard in Assyria is the little horn of the Assyro-Macedonian horn of the goat." And that is quite correct. So what that means to us is this: what we see happening in Syria today is the precursor of the fulfilment of the second part of Daniel 11:40. We're going to have a king of the north. We're going to have Russia stamping the residue with the feet, going right across to take possession, right up to the Indus River, which was the boundary of Alexander's empire and the boundary of the Seleucid kingdom in the east. When they've got that territory, we'll have our Persia of Ezekiel 38 verse 5. We'll have our king of the north who can then come against him, the power occupying Constantinople, which of course today is Turkey. And then they can make their advance southwards down through the coastal strip of the land of Israel and into Egypt. And then of course they're drawn back to Jerusalem to be destroyed in the events of Armageddon. That's what's happening. So you see, what happens in these prophecies is that Gog has various names given to it. Gog in power passes through several phases on the way to Armageddon. They become the king of the north when they secure the old Seleucid territory. They also at that time, planting their standard in Assyria, become the Assyrian of the latter days. The little horn of the goat is a title that they acquire when they come to control Constantinople and re-establish the eastern leg of the image. They become a cruel lord when they arrive to dominate Egypt, as Isaiah 19 verse 4 describes. This is the Assyrian Empire from BC 770 to 609. Brother Thomas said, the power that rules in Constantinople and plants its standard in Assyria is the little horn of the Assyro-Macedonian horn of the goat. You can't even believe, can you? But I'm done.
BibleTruthandProphecy.com is a worldwide collaboration by Christadelphians to help promote the understanding of God's Word to those who are seeking the truth about the human condition and God's plan and purpose with this earth and with mankind upon it. Bible Truth and Prophecy is part of a wider set of online resources provided by Christadelphianvideo.org for establishing just how far removed the true Christian teaching of the first century apostles is from that taught by mainstream Christendom today. BibleTruthandProphecy.com is very much a standalone website, but benefits from our vast network of sites and resources and social media. Here are just a few of the things that BibleTruthandProphecy.com offers. We have a good number of written articles supplied to us from brothers from all over the globe. These deal with first principle issues, creation versus evolution, the inspiration of the Bible, and so much more. We have a whole section of video study series. These are studies that have been posted onto our YouTube channel, but because of the difficulty of the search feature within YouTube, we have chosen to host on Bible Truth and Prophecy. So now every video you search for within the site, you can be guaranteed that it will be of a Christadelphian nature. We also have a preaching video section where any ecclesia is invited to download and use or embed these videos within their own ecclesial websites. We also have an exhortation service where we produce 2 or 3 exhortations per week, which we then circulate to brethren and sisters in isolation. We also have an ever-growing list of approved Christadelphian sites. We also have a page of live news feeds, so you can keep up to date with all the breaking news as it happens. We also have a section for the daily readings. Each day at around midnight we publish all 3 of the daily readings, and then later on in the day we publish thought for the days, often based on all 3 portions of the daily readings. Within each daily reading post there is also a link to enable you to have the Bible chapter read to you directly. We also feature Bible in the News videos which we have produced from the Bible in the News website. We also feature Brother Don Pierce's milestone snippets, which come out approximately 3 times a week. We also feature Andy Walton's weekly World Watch and other commentaries and analysis from other brethren on world news events. You can also subscribe to the blog and be notified of posts as they happen in real time, and also subscribe to the weekly newsletter which is provided by Christadelphianvideo.org. Every page and post on the site has the facility to be able to leave a comment or make an observation, so please take advantage of this and let us know what you think of the site.